everybody, and welcome to The Lazy Actor, the podcast for actors that does all the work for you. Every episode, we break down a chapter from a famous acting book, take away the great stories, and take away the key learnings, so you don't have to. Lazy McLazersons. With me, again, back by popular demand, by Tim from radioradio.com, who is the lovely producer of this podcast, and the actorsplace.org, who brings in the talent, which is me. And then also Florian is here.
Hi, everyone.
Florian Francois.
I'm back.
Actor, improviser, also the runner of Canada's largest French open mic night outside of the French-speaking province of Quebec, Franco Open Mic.
Frank Open Mic.
Sure.
Almost there.
You can look him up online at...
On Instagram and Twitter, Florian Francois, florian.j.francois on Instagram, and something like that on Twitter too.
And that's where they can find out about the Frank
Open Mic, also www.frankopenmic.com.
So Frank Open Mic, and Florian, of course, is a working actor as I am. And we are here to talk about the fifth guidepost in the great Audition by Michel Shurtleff. It's an amazing acting book by Michel Shurtleff, the first book I ever read. And if you've listened to this more than one episode of this podcast, you are sick of me telling you that because you know it's the first book I ever read. Florian, have you read this book?
No.
Well, you don't have to anymore.
I know.
All you have to do is listen to this podcast.
And
the
because
the ones you're not in, at least.
I'm a lazy actor.
You are a lazy actor.
I can watch all the previous episodes and leave a rating on iTunes and everywhere you can find your podcast.
Exactly.
Make sure to make a review and 5 stars.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thank you very much. So this guidepost is opposites.
Ooh.
And as actors, you're always thinking about, people tell you about opposites. They might also talk about subtext. There's this... What is it called when it's on the surface and then the subtext is below it? But what's the surface? Like your lines. We're looking at Tim like he knows. Yeah. He's just looking back at us like, did you want me to search it? No, Tim, I don't want you to search it.
He has his IMDb open for every question we have, but that's not on the IMDb.
That's right. One of the things I will say is when I was reading this chapter, I decided to put a big thing on the very top, and it's know yourself. Because one of the things he gets at, and again, the only real weakness I can say in this whole book is that there's very little tactics. It's a lot of ideas, and also to his credit, lots of very specific, I said this, she said this, I said this, she said this, I said this, examples. So it almost reads like you're reading a script. Mm-hmm. He said, she said, like with their names. Those are two strengths. Tactics aren't one of them. But knowing yourself is what he talks about a lot in this, knowing how you would react in different ways to one situation. In other words, knowing how you might say on the surface, but how you'd feel underneath is the big learning here. And this is another place where I think Michel Shurtleff as a casting director doesn't communicate well or tries to be a little clever. And I don't know if it translates into actual acting. So I put down the choking story. The choking story. If you go on YouTube and look Michel Shurtleff, there's a documentary about him. And he has this kind of thing where acting teachers will do something so that they get an applause or try and sound really clever. And some acting teachers will drop names. Some acting teachers will have their canned jokes. And it's the illusion of information. I'm going to shit on the late, great Michel Shurtleff for just a moment because I'm obviously so successful. That's why I'm a household name. So in the documentary, he talks about, what if the casting director or what if the reader isn't giving you what you want so that you can play? And this is not directly linked to opposites. So he's like, come here. And he says, suppose you're playing a scene where I'm choking you. And then he just starts choking her. Like for real.
Yeah.
For like a second. And then she's like, see, you didn't have to do anything. And everyone like clapped like that was some key learning. Like you just pretend you're choking someone and that's all, even if they're not giving you anything. And that was kind of like a random thing. For some reason, I thought about it here when it says about knowing yourself. I'm like, that's a cheap way to try and get a clap in an acting class. But knowing sometimes when a reader is not giving you what you want, knowing how you would respond in a real life situation might help.
Mhm.
We're going to get more into tactics at the end of the podcast. I think that might be a new thing we do is like, here's 3 things that you should try and do as like an actual physical tactic for the next script you read. But for the meantime, let's go into a little bit of what he says with the knowledge here. Whatever you decide is your motivation in the scene, the opposite of that is also true and should be in the scene. So if you decide, and we talked about this in earlier guideposts, like what you're fighting for is for you to finally realize that you love me. I'm also fighting to not love you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opposite, right? I'm also fighting for you to just fucking leave me alone because I know you're bad for me. I'm going to tell you, and I bring up the woman that broke my heart a lot, and it's kind of a serious thing, because she's a whore. I'm sorry, that's not true, and nor is it respectful of women, and I apologize for that. But if you remember the previous podcast, humor.
Episode 4.
Defense mechanism, because it hurts. So there's this horrible woman.
Yeah.
I should say her name. I'm not going to say her name because she'll never listen to this. But it doesn't matter. So she broke my heart. I bumped into her 2 weeks ago. She destroyed me like 5 or 6 years ago. Only woman I've ever said I love you to. And I thought about this because as an actor's mind, you're kind of like selfish sometimes when you think. And she sat down for a moment and chatted with me. And I was struggling the whole time. And for days later, between like spitting in her face, like actually spitting in her face, I fantasize about that. But also trying to be like, do you want to hang out later? And fighting those 2 things. And the next day and the day after and the day after and the day after, struggling between like, you know what? I just want to hate fuck this girl. But at the same time, like I'd love to see her and I want to kiss her. And that's like a legit real thing that when I thought about opposites, in every conversation I've had with her since then, like not since 2 weeks ago, but since she broke my heart, I've always struggled between those 2 things. And it's in everything I do where I'm trying to be nice, but then I want to be mean. Or I'm trying to be being standoffish so that maybe she talks to me longer or she feels I'm over her. And then she'll maybe want to be like, let's get together. And that's about drawing. And to this day, when I have scenes where I have to play someone I love and I'm a little bitter about it, I think about her and I try and use that in my scene. And that's what he's saying about knowing yourself. And there's more examples of that.
Yeah, I think if I can, I'm here, so I'm going to use my voice. I think it's something I hear a lot about. I know a lot of actors that go see some therapists to actually get to know themselves better.
I had an acting teacher recommend that if you have any kind of health insurance that'll pay for a therapist, just go.
Yeah.
Just to go and talk about your feelings and stuff to like do it. Yeah.
Because I mean, I haven't gone and I don't have any training on that. But what you were saying, from my very basic knowledge, it's all like all the different layers of your subconscious or something. So I think it's also like everyone had that thing, though. You know, like you're in a line at the supermarket and you just want to get this over with. And if you could punch this fat fuck in front of you just to get fat, part of you want to do it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then there's part of you just like, I'm just going to wait. And the part of you just like, so we always have different, like, because we're not only them. And we all have this dimension. We all have these wants. We all have these instincts. So I think it's a good way. And also it's interesting to watch people
react differently than what you expect.
And also not knowing what they're going to do. If you're too predictable, why would people watch you?
We should do that. That's a big learning from Mamet's book, True and False. Is that what it's called? I think that's the book we'll do next. Because he talks about when in real life do you actually know what you feel exactly. Yet all acting teachers and actors decide, like, this is how I feel. And that's not real life. That's what you're saying. Yeah. I put down some examples. He said, well, here's exactly what you're saying. He literally says in the next chapter, in the next paragraph, consistency is the heart of dull acting. Mm-hmm. Someone who's mad the whole time or is tough the whole time is the best example of boring, superficial, like, I don't really care acting. Mm-hmm. I wrote down a few examples here. Al Pacino in The Godfather, there's the famous anecdote that because the studio never wanted Al Pacino in the film. And there's this one scene where he's supposed to kill a guy. He goes into the bathroom. He's supposed to grab the gun, walk up, shoot, and walk out. Instead, Al Pacino takes the gun, but then he sits down and lets the guys keep talking. And the camera's just on him, just looking at the two talking. And you're like, what's happening? What's happening? Why is he shooting them? Because they tell him in the movie, the characters say, shoot him and leave. But in the show, he doesn't shoot them. He just sits down with the gun in his pocket and he's watching them. And it goes on for like 2 minutes. In my brain, it feels like it goes on for 2 minutes. And then he pulls the gun out and shoots them. And it's totally not what you're expecting. You expect one thing and he messed with you. Mm. And that's in the history, the mythology of The Godfather. That's what got Al Pacino the part. That's when the studio finally said, okay, fine. This is the person we want. Mm. I also put down another example because, again, if you listen to the last episode, the biggest fault with this book now, and this is why it needs a modern update, is all the examples are not things that anyone can picture or understand.
I mean, The Godfather is... Yeah.
This is not from them. That's me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is me, Florian.
No,
I decided that.
Because
I'll tell you the examples he uses later. But here's another one. If you ever watch the series Jekyll on the BBC,
the greatest.
The contrast between what you would imagine. Here's another way you use contrast. What you would imagine the character to be and what he was. He looked like a dad, but managed to embrace all this crazy behavior. I also wrote down, if you watch the series Rome.
Yeah, I watched a long time ago. But no. Yeah.
The actor, Tim.
Yes, sir.
Look up because he's a famous actor that he's one of these guys that you'd recognize his face, but you wouldn't know his name. The guy who plays Caesar in Rome, they established this whole relationship between himself and like this woman that they grew up loving each other, but never actually got married because Caesar was too committed to his own life. And throughout the show, he's supporting her subtly and she's supporting him. And then in one episode where you think he's about to support her, he beats the shit out of her in front of everyone. And I still think about that scene because I expected it to go one way. And I was like, what the fuck? I don't know if it was written. I don't know if that's the writer putting in contrast. I don't know if that's an acting decision, but it was still a great moment.
Sir and Hines.
Sir and Hines?
Ciaran. Ciaran.
Ciaran? What is it? No, don't get in the shot. You're not in the shot, Tim. Get out of the shot.
It's an actor prediction.
It's an actor's podcast. Voice actors don't count.
Ciaran Hines.
I'm just kidding. Ciaran Hines.
Ciaran Hines.
You should see the rage in Tim's eyes right now. You see that rage, Florian?
Yeah.
This is how you establish dominance.
I see the tears.
Now let's see the contrast, Tim. Oh, actually, this is a great example of contrast because Tim is upset but is smiling as he's upset. He's in his head, he's thinking Ivan is a dick. But he's got this big smile on his face. Humor, contrast.
That's the producer's smile.
That's the producer's smile.
Because he's making money out of this podcast.
Dollar bills, y'all.
So I really felt like with all the examples you're doing, and maybe it's because you mentioned The Godfather, but I think The Sopranos too, in the contrast, and is one master, acting wise, this series is just amazing.
The conflict in their brains.
Yeah. And it's also a show about the mob, but also about therapy. So I think that's a must-see for everyone, but I think especially for actors.
For sure. Actually, yeah, I'm going to watch that. I should probably rewatch the series. It is the actor's creation of opposites that develops conflict and therefore drama and therefore interest. But is the process... So, for example, he talks about pain. If we train to avoid conflict, run from confrontations, make our painful lives as easy as we can for ourselves. But it is the process of dealing with pain the actor must put on the stage, not the fact of having solved it. And Florian, you're a big improv person. There's another amazing podcast called The Backline, improv podcast. I think you turned me onto it. Rob Norman, shout out. robnorman.com probably. No, thereal.norman.com or The Backline podcast. They did a whole episode, and one of the things that I've always stood out in my brain was in improv, one of the secrets of good improv is not solving the problem, it's exploring the problem. So instead of, if you're in a scene where there's it's a painful moment and you're like, I just want this to end, that's no fun. It's you trying to figure out how it ends, why it's not ending. That's the fun in the story. And that's a big thing with improv, isn't it, Florian?
Yeah, it's
moving on. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Florian.
No, and I think, it's, I think exploring, but are we not going to have a podcast about exploring soon?
We have the next episode is Guidepost 6, which is discoveries.
Oh.
Not exploring,
discovering.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think
here we're talking about contrast, and this is just something that made me think of it.
We talked in the last episode, we also talked about finding the fun, exploring. Mm-hmm. Exploring is, I think, one of the most, a word that brings me joy. Exploring is going for discovery, is finding the kid inside you that want you to discover treasure, that want you to go on an island with pirates, that sort of thing. So exploring is always fun. It's something where you can find the fun, and also you can be surprised. As an actor, you want to be surprised because you want to surprise the audience. So the exploration and not going on with no, and if you know and you already know what you're going to do, you already know everything, where is the fun for you and for the audience? So I think the exploration also with your partner, reacting on how he reacts and connecting with your partner is really a tactic that can actually helps.
Well, I have a good tactic that I'm going to tell at the end of this episode to how you can find the contrast to help, and how you can make choices that'll help you discover and explore contrast. Because one of the biggest things, and this is the thing about, it's not about solving or deciding, it's about exploring the decision, exploring the problem. Here's a great example from the book that I really loved. Watch a parent with their child. One moment they're smothering the child with affection. The next moment they want to beat her up because she's so vexing. You see this all the time, where a parent will be like, in 1 second, honey, I love you. I love you. Shut up. And that's another great example of loving and hating something at the same time. How can you love and hate something at the same time? How can you be both bored and interested at the same time? The way Florian is right now staring at me.
Yeah.
Right? Sit up. Here's another, and again, one of the reasons A Taste of Honey is such an effective play. Have any of you heard of the play A Taste of Honey, which was on Broadway?
No.
That's right. Tim is looking.
It's not on IMDb.
Look up A Taste of Honey. And then his other example was, The Subject Was Roses by Frank Gilroy, which is another play. So again, while it's valid and the examples are really great, and for this example it was The Subject of Roses, it is 1-2 pages long of him breaking down the scene, the character, and the actor decisions. But again, I think this needs a little refresher.
I mean, maybe we're not as theater savvy as we think we are too.
That's true. Maybe we are lazy actors.
Maybe we just ignore it.
Well, I can't remember one famous acting teacher who said, unless you understand the classics, then you don't really understand acting. Unless you understand where the acting, training came from, you don't understand. I'm not sure if I subscribe to that, but that's something.
I think there's value in it.
Yeah. I mean, watching old films, I try and do that on occasion. There's actually another podcast that's doing that.
I think it's when I see some actors that never saw classic movies like The Godfather, who don't go to I'm guilty of that. I don't go to the theater that often, but I think it's important for us. It's part of our job. You listen to me, you lazy actors. It's part of our job to watch all the movies, all the classics.
And copy them and make them ourselves.
There's hundreds and thousands of lists of the top hundreds movie that you must have seen in your life. I think the American Film Institute has one as one of the most famous one. You should know about it, even if you're too lazy to watch the full movie. At least go and check some clips on YouTube.
Let me jump in on this one, because there's something that you're getting at here. CNN. I rarely watch TV. I was staying with my uncle's house and he had the TV going. CNN on Friday nights or Saturday night had this, and they have a series. It's an anthology series called Movies, where they take a period of time and they talk about the great films of that period. Yeah. And all these people comment on what it meant, why it was important. So that's another, it's just for lazy actors, it's the Coles Notes essentially of having to watch. So there's this whole section about the 1970 to 1979, the 70s. And it's all the big films that changed everything that came after it. And it's people talking about why they changed and why it was important.
Yeah, and it's also because this is our common language. If you're on set with a director and he starts to give you example of things that inspire them, like, I don't know, like to go back to The Godfather and talking about this scene. Well, if you never saw The Godfather, if you don't know who Al Pacino is, and I'm sure there's actors out there who don't know, it's so
I
important.
met someone who didn't know who Wu-Tang Clan was. That was shocking.
The what? I know who the Wu-Tang Clan is.
The fuck out of this studio. You don't know who the goddamn Wu-Tang Clan
I know
is.
who they are. They make t-shirts.
Exactly. They do make t-shirts. I'm going to, before we get, we're pretty much through the Guidepost. I found that as he's gone into the Guidepost, the chapters are getting smaller and smaller.
A lazy writer.
Lazy writer. Late, great Michel Shurtleff. There is one little umphy thing I have, because agents and casting directors like to throw these little passive-aggressive things without understanding the actor's perspective. And they always talk about they understand the actor's perspective. And there's always these phrases like, I don't understand why actors don't blank. I'm constantly surprised at how little actors know themselves, since I expect, inaccurately, actors to know themselves better than other human beings do. That just felt really passive aggressive. That is a casting director that has seen a lot of bad actors. Do you know what I mean? And how, like, what does that even mean? And why should I, here's the trap. This is something that really bugs me about acting fucking teachers. So many of them treat acting classes, and so many wannabe actors go into these acting classes treating it like it's therapy instead of seeing a therapist. And unless you talk about release some intense trauma, right? Then you're not really acting. And I've been in classes where people are like, I want you to think about something like a real heartbreak, and people start breaking down on stage, and then they're emotionally broken down, and they think they've discovered something or that they're acting. But that has very little to do with the day-to-day process of acting. Also, and here's just my logistical mind, and you can write me if you disagree. You're wrong, but if you disagree, write me and tell me that I'm wrong. That is the little moment of your role is the destruction, the vulnerability. That is the minority of time as working actors that we're doing that. Yet and still, all the focus is on this deep rooted, bring something out. What the fuck does that have to do with my hair commercial? What does that have to do with cashier number 2? Let's just be real for a minute here. And this is something, yes, the goal is to be the co-star or the star of a film where you can show the various aspects of human behavior. And that's what we all want. But guess what? 99% of the time, you're doing kids theater. You are Latino thug, guest starring as mobster. And yes, you want to show vulnerability, right? And you want to show the contrast, and I'll give you a few examples and tactics at the end. But that just really bugged me as an actor. How fucking well does anyone know themselves? And why the fuck should I do that in an empty theater in front of 3 people who don't give a fuck? Yes, I need to do that if the part calls for it. But why does that have to be the way I'm defined as a good actor or not?
So I'm going to bring a more nuance. I agree with most of the things you're saying. I just see that as another tool. I think it's important to be aware of who you are, to be aware of what you're thinking. Now I agree. And even last time I was on set, I was talking to an actor who talked to me about his acting class experiences and talking about the first
Where he cried? First time I cried?
The first class he took, it started by the teacher asking all the new actors to write a letter about their biggest trauma and read it in front of everyone.
See, that's just irresponsible
That's
bullshit.
Irresponsible. That's abusive.
Yeah.
That's creating a cult. That's unhealthy.
Creating a cult around the teacher is the other thing that happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of create this emotional need,
Please like me, yeah.
I think it's a terrible way, and I'm personally running away from all of that kind of class. Now, maybe it works for some people, but I think it's more of a personal work, and I think mixing acting and therapy. It's also, if going to an acting class gives you anxiety, maybe that's not the right class for you.
Dustin Hoffman talked about this a lot, where he talked about...
Yeah, he told me.
Why do you always have to feel everything? Like that's not acting. Like you don't have to feel everything all the time. That's overacting. You can watch it. It's his thing on the Actor Studio. He talked a little bit about that. And because we're at the end of the Guidepost, I want to transition now, because I agree with you. Acting is not therapy, nor should you cheat it that way. And if you ever go to an acting teacher that tries to make you do stuff like that, quit. Because they just like praises of how good acting teachers are. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about some tactics, how we can translate opposites into how you rehearse and how you prepare for auditions. Tactic number 1 that I think is a great one. Start with an external facial expression, but then have the opposite internal state. So here's how I thought. I'm going to do a scene with Florian, right? And let's say I'm smiling, but I hate him the whole time. And so every time we're talking about something, every time I'm listening to him, all I'm doing is imagining choking him, but I'm not allowed to stop smiling.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast. Yeah. I know how much you like my work and how much I'm an inspiration to you. Because I'm such a better actor, I know I teach you a lot, and
So that's one tactic. And here's the thing. It's not just those examples I give you. Pick 6 facial expressions, for example, depending on your time or who you're working with. And whatever his facial expression is up here, pick the opposite emotion internally, because I believe acting is like a muscle. You have to exercise it. If I only did bicep curls with dumbbells, I would not get the same performance as if I did a set with dumbbells. Then I use the barbell. Then I use the rope. This is what this is doing. So if I put, your face has to be completely neutral, but on the inside you're happy. Or the lines read really aggressive, but I want you to smile. Do these tactics where your external physical appearance is the opposite of your internal state. Pick 5 externals, 5 internals, do opposites. That is how you can rehearse and train. And what'll happen is this. Most of it won't work the whole time, but it'll help you discover, that one moment where you look serious, but you said something really sad. That will be the moment that you can be like, now I have a moment where I can show that. And the rest of your lines can build and then recede from it. And that's the tactic that I thought of when I was reading that.
I think also in preparation, that's something coming from improv, you've seen me when I had less experience, I was very expressive. It's reading the line the most neutral possible way. Once again, it's a matter of like expressing, going from the most neutral to the most expressive is really to explore. Like one thing I personally work a lot is the pace, like the being slow, leaving some space, or like being super fast. It's like really try to explore and do all different kind of ways. And then, as you perfectly said, 80% perfectly said, it's then you realize what fits or not, what's working or not. Like, oh yeah, this moment when I was smiling, when I wanted to punch him in the face, that looked good. That was nice. That was a nice moment.
Or this moment, or like that where you're not allowed to move, but really all you're thinking was, I want to touch you. That changes something, and I try and always do that in my day-to-day life. Recognize moments, whether it's heartbreak or like really happy, but you don't want to seem so happy, nervous, but you don't want to seem so nervous. And that is the 5th guidepost, finding opposites and a tactic to find that opposite, because all good actors, all good human beings are always a conflict of emotions. Part of that conflict is wanting to work on your acting, but being lazy. You lazy actors. So lazy actors, that brings us to the end of this episode. The Guidepost number 5, Opposites. The book was Audition by Michel Shurtleff. The production was radio.com. The talent was theactorsplace.org and also Florian. You can make sure to check out francoopenmic.com.
francoopenmic.com.
It's Franco Open Mic. You have to press the O.
There's only one O.
Yeah, francoopenmic.com.
One word.
Check it out if you're ever in Toronto. It's the largest French open mic night. You can enjoy it without understanding French because there's a lot of fun stuff and music that happens there too. But give it a little look-see-poo. Thank you very much, Florian, for joining me.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy, for finding that one thing online.
My pleasure.
Thank you. See you later, lazy actors.
You've been listening to the Lazy Actor Podcast, a presentation of RadioRadio.com and theactorsplace.org.